Good morning, everyone. It is good to be here to remember. It's good to be here, and I thank the mayor, and I thank the color guard, and the prayers, the songs, and the national anthem. I tell you, for those that served, and I know there's many here, it is the service and the brotherhood and sisterhood, the brothers and sisters that you serve with, that make it special. And it is why this day is so important and why it is distinct and set off almost 6 months from Veterans Day when we honor all those who serve, because the day that we honor those who have passed away, those who died in service to this country, is even more special. Over 1.1 million have died in service to their country. As I saw a former NFL player this morning describe it, he was in Afghanistan in 2011, and he served after graduating from West Point. And he lost one of his platoon mates. He was a lieutenant. He talked about it when he came home. He said, the greatest honor of my life, and it is for me as well, is serving in the United States military. He said, but I was one of the lucky ones who made it home. And he began to think about the one who did not. As we understand what goes on in small town just like this, there are whistles of trains that will go through today that are not heard. Remember them as we pause for just a moment. You know, it's the little things in life. It's the little things in life that make a difference. And for those today who are remembering those who did not come home, and I can tell you from being a real experience for those who lost loved ones, when I pastored Chicopee Baptist Church, I had the great honor of having men who served and were at D-Day -3, D-Day -9, D-Day -11, D-Day -15. And when they talked about it, they did not talk about what they did. They talked about others and talked about the ones that were left. And I remember asking one of them one time, I said, what is it that makes it so special? Why do you remember back, and what is the thing? He said, Doug, he said, while I was there, he said, I did what I had to do. He said, but what made me go on was remembering what I would come home to. He said it was those small things. He said seeing my wife again, getting something real to eat, and going to the square in Gainesville. And he said, it's just those kind of things that made me keep going. And then he paused. And it was a long pause. And he said also, I kept going because he said, I realized I could be like some of my friends who are not coming home, who did not get to go to the square anymore, who did not get to go see their families anymore. And that made an impression on me. And as I prepared, not only for this morning, but as I prepared for my podcast episode, one of the things that stuck in my mind, and I realized I had never really talked about except a few times with close friends. And that was being in Iraq in 2008 and 2009. I remember my first time going there, I was the flight line chaplain, which meant that I stayed out with the planes and with the crews and went outside the wire with our security forces. But every Monday night I would have to go back in and I would have to pull a tour at the hospital, because we only had one hospital chaplain, a day and night chaplain, and we could never leave the hospital uncovered. And so for them to have a break, we had to arrange it where we would cover their off night. We got 6 nights on, 1 night off. And I'll have to say that first time I went in to get situated and orientated in the hospital was very concerning. I went into what was the recovery room, and I began to wonder, and I'll just be very blunt with you, as I saw what was happening there, and I saw the effects of the gunshots, and I saw the effects of IEDs, and I saw the effects of war, I began to wonder in my first 2 days there what was going on, because all I saw was those who were hurt, and there were staples and stitches and bandages everywhere. As I began to continue through those Monday nights, some were quiet, but others were not. And I went through a temporary stretch there, but I call it temporary because if it had went permanent, I'm not sure how much I would have survived. We went about 3-4 weeks in a row in which every Monday night I served, we had something happen, a mass casualty incident happen, and we would lose people who would come through our ER, and we'd come when they would arrive past, or they would come so badly wounded that we didn't know if we could save them. if they passed under what was known as the Heroes Highway in Balad, it was a flag draped over a tent where the helicopters bring you in. If they brought you under the Heroes Highway and you were alive, those wonderful men and women in our medical corps had a 98.5% survival rate to get you to Germany or possibly get you home. Now, some died when they got here, but they at least got home. 98.5. When I thought about that just the other day, when I had the privilege of serving in United States Congress in Washington, D.C., if you ever have the chance to go, please go and go to the Rayburn House office building. It was where the Judiciary Committee was. And every morning and every afternoon when I'd walk into that committee, to that building, the Rayburn office building on the left, there's a big wall very similar to this wall right here that had names of all those who had died in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the story I'm about to tell you, like I said, is one for those who've served overseas. I will tell you, there was a time after I got home I didn't ever want to hear a helicopter sound again. Maybe you understand what I'm talking about. Because in Balad, the helicopters brought in the wounded and the dead. And every time one came, I knew something was up. But in that building, in Rayburn House Office, where those names were, I found a specific place in 2008 and 2009. And I looked up one day as I was going, and I recognized some names. And as I was doing so, I pulled out just the other day an Air Force Times. As I pulled out the Air Force Times, it's dated November 10th, 2008. And in the Air Force Times, it was something to read, it was something to do instead of reading a book or going on while I was in Iraq, and I bought it there on the base. And as I was flipping through it every week in the Air Force Times, after you got through some of the stories that were going on about what was going here, you came to a section that said around the Air Force. They talked about what was going on, but down here at the bottom, it listed the casualties of that prior week. And as I opened it up, I noticed the pictures. And I noticed the pictures of those that it came through. And I noticed the pictures of Brian Haas, Stacy Dryden, and one Cody Eggleston. And I noticed a couple of more. And I realized, even in Iraq on that day, that I knew each of these individuals by more than a picture in the Air Force Times. I'd actually seen them in the hospital at Balad. I'd actually prayed over them in the hospital at Balad. In fact, Mr. Eggleston was an interesting individual. He was a handsome man, young man, no more than 19 or 20. He'd been hit in an ambush, an IED. Several from his unit had came in. And I remember that evening walking in, and I went to the first couple of beds and some that were there, and I began to talk to them and just talk to them about what, if they need anything, I pray with them. You know, me being a chaplain, that's what I do. And I remember one young man, he kept saying, he said, how's Cody? How's Cody? And at that point in time, I had just walked in. I didn't know who he was talking about. And I talked to him a little bit. He described what had happened, and he said, we got him back here. He said, you got to take care of it. Now, understand, this young man was not in the best of shape himself, but he was concerned about Cody. I went around the little hallway, and I come to this bed, and I saw this young man pretty bandaged up on a respirator with a lot of tubes, a lot of bandages, with just a little bit of a blonde hair that I could see above the bandages. The nurses came by, and then one of the doctors came by, and he said, Chap, you're going to have to pray hard on this one. He said, we're doing all we can, but we just don't know if we're going to be able to make it. And so I began to pray, and I was all throughout the night, I would come back in, and I would check on him. He never moved, but he was still there. And I would lean down and I'd pray with him, and I would lean down and talk to the nurse and doctor. And I said, "Chap, he's trying. We're going to get him on a plane first thing." The next flight that morning, he left out. He left out from Iraq alive. When I read later, he didn't make it back home. He passed away here in the United States with family. When I was in that hospital, Memorial Day became very real for me. And it became very real, I hope, for you. This is a day to celebrate. And after this morning, I would hope that you would celebrate with your families and do all the things that we think about. Because you're celebrating because others are not able to celebrate. You're able to celebrate because others went and did not return. Now, many did, but many did not return. And it's still real today. As you think about this moment, as you think about death, I'll leave you with this. That night, there was one night, was in the hospital, and we had a young man who came and he passed away. Right there on the table, the doctors had worked on him, and it was a tough night for everybody. I walked him to the morgue. I turned around, and I've been a pastor here in Georgia and all over for a long time. And I've been at the bedside of those who've taken their last breath on many occasions. And always here, there was typically family around. And it was never quiet. It was never quiet. No matter what, even if you were preparing for that loved one's death, it was never quiet, because the minute they take that last breath, I've heard everybody scream for no, to mom, to dad, to whatever it may be. But you want one more second, one more moment, one more time to say goodbye, one more time to say I love you. You want that, and it's noise that fills, and then you hear crying. I'll tell you, when Memorial Day became real, truly for me, was when I walked back to my office that night. And it was nothing but silence. The hallway was quiet. There was no crying. There was no trying to accept. Because each of us who were there in that hospital were dealing with it in our own special way. Because we knew that in just a moment somebody else could possibly be coming in. But as I stood in that little hallway that I can see in my mind right now, I thought about how quiet it was. And I thought to myself, in just a matter of a few hours, it will not be quiet somewhere many miles away from here. Because they're going to hear the knock on the door. And there's going to be somebody there to tell them that their son, their daughter, their husband, their wife, their friend is not coming home. Because they had gave. They gave, as Abraham Lincoln said, the last full measure of devotion to this country. It is in that silence we remember today. So even in the noise, I challenge you to take at least a little bit today and find some silence for those families that did not have their loved one come home. And for them, Memorial Day is a reminder of the life that that person lived and the gift that they gave to this country. God bless you as you remember Memorial Day.